So welcome everyone. We welcome you to episode 18 of Priestessing the Priestesses with Kohenet Annie Matan, myself, of course, and Marguerite Rigoglioso, who has broken many boundaries and conceptions and misconceptions about divine birth and conception. And she's going to talk with us about Mary and about really groundbreaking ideas that she encountered and just owned and researched very, very heavily and fruitfully years ago in her doctoral work. She is the founding director of Seven Sisters Mystery School, and she will tell us more about the work that she does there. Welcome, Marguerite.
Thank you so much, Devorah and Annie. Devorah, thank you also just for being such a supporter of my work, which you have been all throughout the years. And I really appreciate that. You know, whether you have exactly gone into the belief structure that I propose or not, you've always been really respectful, and I am grateful. So yeah, just to start off with, my most recent book, which is coming out April 6th, 2021, is called The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception. And the subtitle is Mary and the Lineage of Virgin Births. And so that is kind of the next generation discussion that I'm putting forth about divine birth as an actual practice of women from time immemorial, by looking specifically at Mary and the evidence for that. But what I do at the beginning of the book is I consolidate all of my research from my first two books, which included The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece, which is my first one, and then Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity, which was the second one. And I put that all into a condensed, readable form in basically, the second chapter of the book, with all the background of what is this practice of divine birth? What did it entail? What was the history of it? How did it devolve and why? And how it was essentially corrupted and co-opted. And then what I do is I look at an apocryphal gospel, one of those famous thrown out gospels by the Catholic Church, but where all the juicy stuff is, that was originally called Birth of Mary, but has come down in scholarly circles as the infancy gospel of James, which is James being the one who claims to have written it, who may have been one of the sons of Mary's consort Joseph, and therefore an eyewitness to, many of these things, including the birth of Jesus in the cave and so forth. So the point here is that I'm correcting the view that Mary is the only one who gave virgin birth, maybe aside from Elizabeth, who is talked about as giving birth to John the Baptist. But what I flesh out is that this was a whole program of a lineage practice. And so you have Mary, who was she was divinely conceived by her mother Anne, according to this infancy gospel. And then Elizabeth was a relative of theirs who, if you trace through the Islamic tradition, was actually Anne's sister, therefore Mary's aunt. So this is like this whole family constellation that brought to birth Jesus and John the Baptist as like latter day iterations of the holy avatar energy that needs to periodically come into humanity to correct the wrongs, do the healings, and get humanity back on track after it's degenerated. And this has gone on in many other traditions. And for example, in the Iroquois tradition, or the Haudenosaunee, you have the peacemaker, who is sort of like a periodically reincarnating figure. But in the most recent one, where we know him as the peacemaker, he's the one who, because he was an avatar, and because being an avatar means that you have miraculous capabilities, he was able to draw together the 5 and 6 nations that were warring at the time in North America into the Iroquois Confederacy of Peace. Okay, so these are the types of things that these beings do. Now, going back in the Hebrew tradition, the far distant ancestor to Anne and Mary and Elizabeth was Sarah.
Mhm.
Sarah, the mother of Isaac, the wife of Abraham, the biblical matriarch. And, I was talking about Savina Tuval's book, okay, Sarah the Priestess, where she gets really, really close to identifying her as a divine birth priestess. And I just nudged that over and talk about that extensively in the mystery tradition of miraculous conception. And I also bring in, one of the ancient writers whose name always escapes me. He's escaping me now, and this is Philo. Okay, Philo, who is the one? He's the ancient Jewish commentator who says, "Look, she, Zipporah, Rachel, and Leah were all virgins, or they had to restore their virginity in order to give special births." That is at the foundation of the Hebrew tradition, right? So it's like, oh my God, once you start lifting these veils, you realize, whoa, this technology has been everywhere. It's just been hidden. And the point is that sometimes the woman who is able to achieve this is young and in her maidenly years, or her just after what would be the traditional age of menarche. And sometimes she's after the traditional time of what we would consider menopause. Although what I find is with these priestesses, it's one big continuum of never menstruating because they were on a purification diet and they were practicing this whole thing and trying to attempt it all throughout their years. So what you hear with Sarah is that her lament about not having a child is not a lament over barrenness. It's a lament over the fact that she was never able to conceive divinely. And partly because she was in a time period when there were constrictions going on these priestesses, whether they could conceive or whether they couldn't conceive, So in these sacred marriage situations that like Sarah got involved in, the energy of the sex act would be siphoned off to do something for the community, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't allowed to result in the birth of a divine child anymore. Okay. But Sarah defied that. Right. And so, we're talking about a tradition that's worldwide that women are capable of. I know personally women who have divinely conceived through various means. And we need to look at what this is, because ultimately what it comes down to is, of course, anything that's very high level like this is going to get attacked. It's going to get taken over.
Sure.
And it's going to be dismantled and then, co-opted for these negative forces. Okay, these negative beings.
And you found some scientific proof early on in your research among, I think,
Yeah, there's a scientific basis for parthenogenesis in certain animals. And there has been scientific experimentation done to instigate divine conception in various animals. And so it is something that biologically is not impossible. And so, but what we're talking about with women is a spiritual technology, not just, some kind of happenstance of biology. So I'll pause there to see how this is all settling with you, or whether you've got any question streams that are occurring.
Yeah, because Annie hasn't heard this before. So yeah.
I have. I mean, I'm like, wow, this is the woman who wrote that. Like, it's kind of cool because I don't remember. I know I've heard it from others. She's like, oh yeah, somebody's been writing about this.
Excellent.
That women have been able to do this divine birth thing, and what's coming up for me, I'm like, okay, so I asked you before. I was like, so can you give me, before we turn the cameras on, I said, can you give me examples when you're using the Hebrew matriarchs as examples? And I want to be able to get there with you. So when you use Sarah as the example, can you explain, like, we're told that the miraculous, like the story I was raised with in Jewish tradition is that there were like challenging pregnancies and miraculous births. And even today, women who are struggling with infertility are offered these stories for the purposes of hope, right? Like, look at our foremothers who also struggled or were told they were barren and then miraculously bore children. And you're saying, well, actually, those were pregnancies that happened with now. And this is where I want to hear the details. I'm like, how was this technically achieved?
Right.
So that's my like Jewish upbringing. And then from, my pagan, like understanding of pagan traditions where there would be a priestess and like a man who was like a stand-in for the divine. Are you talking about sperm coming from a man who is standing in for the divine, or I think no. So I want to hear, like, can you explicitly name what's the technology, if it's okay? Like, I don't know if you feel like you're giving away what's in the book, but for those of us who are like, wait, what? Can you help us bring us in?
Yeah.
And I need to say that I'm going to have to turn my video off so that I don't get kicked off because I'm having bandwidth issues, but I'm still here.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah. So I can give the broad outlines of this, and then people can go to my book to find all the details of how the argument is made, first by Savina and then by me, how I take what she's done and I take it to its kind of logical conclusion. So the point is, with Sarah in particular, we're not 100% sure what her mechanism was. And I talk about possible ways it could have happened. But what I need to say is that this was a practice that devolved over time. It started out as divine parthenogenesis, where the woman was able to purely conceive. And usually at the beginning, these were female children because it was using a light technology into her female eggs. And how would that happen? She had to be a high level being to begin with. She had to be able to get into amazing meditative states, which were working with interdimensional beings to assist the process. And she would have to become a kind of an androgynous self in order to have that conception occur. Okay, so I talk about various instances of this that are in the various ancient texts. Okay, but then there was differing stages where the women started getting interrupted in that parthenogenetic practice by being visited in their astral trance states by these so-called gods who were really interdimensional beings with different agendas. And they would come and they'd be like sniffing out that this thing was going on. And they would come in, and often through trickery, which you hear a lot in the ancient Greek stories of, oh, he appeared to her as a shower of light. He appeared to her in the likeness of Artemis, which is another interesting story, or whatever. And then a conception occurred, but it was a conception of that God's issue, that God's child through the female. All right. So it got co-opted. And then there was a later stage where the females would start cultivating this practice instead of resisting it, because patriarchy was getting too forceful. There were just too many pressures on them, et cetera, et cetera. And then the later stage is what you have in Egypt. The Egyptian queens would engage in a physical sexual intercourse with the pharaoh, because the practice had degenerated so much by that time that the male, and also the males, were keen to own it. So the male would come in, have intercourse with the queen, but it was a specific ritual where his soul essence would get out of the way. His body was active, but the soul of the oversoul of the god would come in and impregnate the woman. Again, we're talking about high level ritual magic, okay, that most of us can barely imagine, but if we get our imaginations going, we can. People who've been there and done that will start pulling the information forward from the Akashic records. So And then there's an even later stage I talk about where the priestess can actually conceive through a male who's not there, even died, which is what happened with Isis. Osiris died, but she used the artificial phallus, the dildo, to call his essence in and become impregnated with Horus. All right. So we're talking deep mysteries here. In terms of Sarah, I talk about various things that could have happened, because there are various things that are said to her and done with her. It could have been that she had a parthenogenetic conception, or it could have been that she had a conception with the Lord, okay, which would be some sort of male form God, because the angels talk to her and they say you're going to conceive through the Lord, okay? Or it could have been that she had ritual sexual encounters with either her consort Abraham, or the Pharaoh of Egypt, or Abimelech of Gerar. Okay, those are three instances where it seems she was engaged in a sacred marriage ritual. And the Pharaoh and Abimelech of Gerar realized they had transgressed. They got into trouble with that.
That's Avimelech, for those of us who have a Hebrew ear. I'm looking at Devorah for.
Yeah,
yes.
great.
Okay.
Abimelech.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So, yes. So, basically it's unclear as to exactly how her what technology she used, whether it was divine conception through a sacred marriage rite, or whether it was divine conception with an unseen being, or whether it was probably less likely parthenogenesis. All right. But I offer all of the discussion of that Savina and I had come to independently, and I really use her material to talk about what the possibilities for Sarah that resulted in a pregnancy that was miraculous.
It's so fascinating. I'm curious to know, because I don't think I've ever really asked you, how do the women respond? You have a lot of women coming over the years to your various programs, of which this has been a core teaching, right? From much of those years, I believe, although you've gone off into the womb matrix and many other related areas. But what is the impact on the women who come to you?
Many of them are completely blown away, for lack of a better term, at the moment. They're crying, they're weeping, it puts together all these things for them. It activates their own memories and knowing of being part of these priestesshoods, sometimes where things went down in a bad way. It activates those who have secretly been engaged in sexual relations with interdimensional beings. And, Megan Rose Wolliver has written a whole thing about when God had sex. That was her dissertation at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And she talks about, the practice of spirit marriage and spirit sexual relations, which is a shamanic thing understood all around the world, but women will come to me and talk about both bidden and unbidden encounters that they've had, right? That have freaked them out, this and that. So they understand, they're able to suddenly put it in context. Now, of course, there have been people like, in an English speaking country that shall remain unnamed, where I did teach, where the woman said, well, you're talking about this like you believe it. And I said, well, and I looked to the other teachers for guidance, like, what should I say here? And they're like, I said, well, I do, and that just, not only did it completely dissemble her, but it created a ripple in the field of the class. And basically I was not invited to teach back in that program anymore. That's how powerful, this type of stuff is. So I'm used to these polarized kinds of reactions. And basically, years ago when I was working with medicine and sacred journeys, I was shown your role is not to convince anyone of anything about this. Your role is to put it out there. And for people who want to be in this reality, for whom it is an empowering thought and suddenly puts a whole bunch of stuff together, helps them initiate to their next level, helps to empower them on whatever level, including eventually the resurrection of this practice, that's who it's for.
Right.
And don't worry about anything else or anyone else.
Right. Which is something in the work we all do, we have to always keep in mind that we are educating, we are bringing new knowledge into the world, and it is definitely not always popular or welcome.
No, not at all.
It's
And
important.
we've all paid a price for that.
Indeed.
In many, many ways,
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with priestess practices that involved embodying the divine in the body of the priestess, like the priestess being the the vessel for divine interaction in a sacred sexual way. Where does that play in, if at all, to what you're describing?
So in the earlier stage of parthenogenesis, she literally becomes one with the cosmogonic female generative force of the entire universe, which ultimately is a parthenogenetic creatrix. In the later stages of this, she becomes the vessel as goddess for the god seed to come forth. So in ancient Mesopotamia, you have, and I talk about this in relation to where Sarah would have come from, what the milieu would have been. It was the priestesses of Mesopotamia who were enacting, they were embodying Inanna in the sacred marriage rites. So,
can you translate some of these words for those of us who aren't as familiar with, you have a facility with sort of high level language with this stuff because you've been learning about it for a long time. So parthenogenesis.
Right. Parthenogenesis is,
and also when you talk, I'm sorry, I know I think there's a little delay, and also when you talk about ancient Mesopotamia, can you put that on a map for us for today? Yes. Tell us where in the world are we talking about and what civilization at the time, according to our history today?
Yes. So parthenogenesis, first of all, is a term that's come to be used as a scientific term that comes from parthenos, which means virgin or maiden, and gignesthai, to be born. So it means to be born of a maiden. In other words, to be born of somebody who has not had sex with a male and no sperm was involved. And that's parthenogenesis. It's the self-creation of the woman, okay, or the creature, the animal. So that's like the original purest form of this, the women who could do that. And then Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia, was where today we have Iran, Iraq, that ancient Mediterranean, that ancient part of the world that was once called Sumer, which is ancient Iraq, that type of thing. But the whole Levant coast, right, where all of this, Israel, east, I guess, north, I'd have to look at a map to get the exact, but essentially ancient Iraq-ish type area.
Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Tigris and the Euphrates, exactly, right? Those rivers. But, that's just one place where this was going on. It was going on really all over every continent.
There was something you said about parthenogenesis so maiden. So the translation of the word that gets translated as virgin or maiden, I've heard in some places, like for example, in in a Jewish context where we're debating, you know, like, was she a virgin, or like women got classified as like virgin, married, divorced, widowed. And there were some who said, oh, well, I think I heard this about Mary, actually, like, it's not that she was a virgin, it's that she was not married. And that word for virgin can also just mean a woman who's never been married. And so, like, how...
Yeah, or independent.
Right.
Independent, right? A woman without a man, a woman whose status has not been defined by a man. And so, like, if we look at it through that lens, if we look at the birth of Jesus through that lens, it's like, oh, an unmarried woman. Well, unmarried women had babies all the time, and it didn't become an issue until the culture that they were a part of said babies out of wedlock is a problem. So, like, what do you do with these? How do you treat these translations in relationship to this particular view of what a virgin birth means?
Right. So yeah, these words, parthenos was one of them. Paida was another one. Alma was another one. Words that meant...
Can you translate these as you go? I don't know what these all mean, so you're helping me.
Words that meant maiden, but were sometimes used to mean virgin. Okay, so sometimes they were signifying young girl, but the thing is that, like, the word parthenos was used for women who were not young girls, you see, but those particular women, as it turns out, were giving birth divinely, you see. So I have a discussion of this, the word parthenos, in my book, The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece. But basically, what I will say is that what it boils down to is the women who were practicing this were celibate. Okay, somebody like Mary was celibate from day one, until there's a possibility that after she gave this divine birth, she was able to have normal sexual relations and she may have given birth to other children. We have these same apocryphal stories about her mother Anne, who after her birthing of Mary gave birth to another girl named Patagot. I have to look it up again. But okay, so the point is that the technology of virginity was used for the highest level forms of this practice. Why? Because you needed a clear womb vessel that had not been touched by a man and penetrated with his energy and his lineage in order to do this divine conceiving with either herself or an interdimensional being. The womb had to be clear and pure. Pure in the sense of clear, okay? Now, what ended up happening is virginity started becoming equated with moral purity because these women were of a high character, all right? But you see what patriarchy does. It takes a good thing, it turns it into its opposite, and then it uses it to control everyone. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened in the Hebrew tradition. I talk about many instances of how important virginity was in the Hebrew tradition. And then in the Christian tradition, it went on and on and on, because Mary started being used as a role model in every way, including virginity. But what they did was they detached her fertility and not her knowledge of divine birth from the virginity. So virginity just became this dead thing that was just used to make women not have sex or to control them for this or that, or to, you know, the crazy stuff that we've been dealing with, you know, on the planet ever since.
So it makes me think, listening to this last bit of what you're saying, that I know you once had a lecture that you did, which may be something for us to talk about in a future meeting, and that is that it wasn't always like this. because for people who think it's always been a patriarchal system, well, no, we know there's a lot of history that comes before that. But I'm just aware of the time, and I want to just allow time for you to say how people can reach you, and to again say, please, the title of your forthcoming book.
Oh, great. Yes. So the forthcoming book is called The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception. And how people can reach me is through the Seven Sisters Mystery School website. That's the organization through which I've been teaching since 2012. I have courses on Mary that explain more of this in detail and also look at Mary in her many other manifold roles and capabilities, and how she is a living presence for women today. I talk about the Holy Womb chakra practices that were part of Mary's work, but that bring this all back to ancient India, which was the repository and protector of this information. But this information ultimately comes directly from Mother Divine through the advanced beings on the planet known as the Rishis. Okay, so I have a class called the Holy Womb Chakra Teachings. I have a class called the Mother Mary Mystery Teachings, and other things that I think would be of interest to people if they want to go deeper into this, elaborate into it, whether on the virgin birth side or looking at how they can work their own womb magic for things, including divine birth, but besides, many other things. So Seven Sisters Mysteryschool.com, and the 7 is spelled out SEVEN.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank
you. Thank you. I just want to say, like, it's such an honor to have you here. Dvora knows, like, the very cool, powerful, amazing women, priestesses, and I just want to recognize how edgy this topic is. And you talked about it too, that, it got you essentially kicked out of a program, and that it feels like really a big deal, an honor to have you here with us, having this conversation on this particular platform, and for us to host you and say, like, yes, go, powerhouse, wise, tuned in, like, bringing taboo. We were just talking the other day about, like, what are we doing this for again? Like, we want to bring these topics that are edgy and taboo and challenging and awakening. And I'm just so excited that we got to hear from you today. And I'm for sure looking forward to going and checking out more of your offerings, and really looking forward to your book.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for that. I really received that, and I'm honored to be here and grateful. So, bless you both for the work you're doing, and both in this series and outside of it. Obviously, you've got tremendous lives and work going on. So
thank you, and many blessings to both of you. And again, Marguerite, thank you so much for making the time. I know your schedule is always overflowing.
That's okay. I'm always happy to talk about this, and it really gives me a lift to my day.
Great. Be well. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Signing off.